Title: The Fog of Blackmoor. Chapter 1: The Return. Evelyn had sworn she would never return to Blackmoor. The coastal town held too many ghosts, too many memories. She remembered the night her family fled after the strange disappearance of their neighbor, Mr. Crane, whose face haunted her dreams for years. But when her estranged sister, Lily, disappeared without a trace, Evelyn had no choice. She packed her bags and drove the long, winding road that led back to the place she once called home. The town hadn't changed much. The same crumbling houses, the same narrow streets twisted like veins through the heart of Blackmoor. But something was different. The air was thick, almost suffocating, with a dense fog that never seemed to lift. The fog felt like it was watching her, breathing alongside her. Chapter 2: The Fog. Evelyn checked into the old family house, abandoned for years, its walls covered in dust and decay, the wallpaper peeled like shedding skin, and the floor creaked with every hesitant step. As night fell, the fog crept in like a living thing, pressing against the windows, seeping through the cracks. It carried with it whispers, faint and unintelligible, but filled with an unmistakable malice, though the house itself remembered her. The townspeople avoided Evelyn's gaze, their faces blank, their eyes hollow, as if something essential had been drained from them. They spoke of the fog in hushed tones, warning her not to go out after dark. But Evelyn was determined. She had to find Lily. Chapter 3: The Disappearance. Evelyn began to investigate. She visited Lily's apartment, now cold and empty. Her sister's belongings were scattered as if she'd left in a hurry. The only clue was a journal, filled with frantic scribbles about the voices in the fog and shadows that watch. The entries grew more incoherent, filled with drawings of distorted figures with gaping mouths and symbols Evelyn didn't recognize. The ink was smudged in places, as if tears had mixed with it. The last entry simply read, "They are here. I can't hide anymore." Chapter 4: The Encounter. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn ventured outside. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling around her like a living shroud. The town was silent, the streetlights flickering in the haze, casting long, distorted shadows. She heard footsteps behind her, soft and deliberate. Turning around, she saw nothing but the dense white mist. Then she saw them shadows moving within the fog, their forms barely distinguishable, their faces twisted into grotesque smiles. One figure lingered longer than the others, its eyes glowing faintly red, watching her with an unnatural stillness. Evelyn ran. Chapter 5: The Old Lighthouse. Desperate for answers, Evelyn visited the old lighthouse, a place she and Lily used to explore as children. The lighthouse keeper, an elderly man named Marcus, was the first person who seemed willing to talk. He told her about the fog, how it was tied to an ancient curse, older than the town itself. "It doesn't just hide things," he whispered, his eyes darting to the window. "It takes them. And once it's taken someone, they're not the same if they come back." Marcus claimed the fog was a gateway, a thin veil between worlds, and Blackmoor was its anchor. "The fog remembers everyone who's ever crossed it," he added. "It feeds on what you fear the most." Chapter 6: The Lost. Evelyn followed the clues deeper into the town's dark history. She discovered old newspaper clippings about mysterious disappearances dating back centuries. People would vanish without a trace, only to return days later, change their eyes empty, their voices hollow echoes of who they once were. She realized with growing horror that Lily might have been one of them. One photo from the 1920s made her blood run cold. A crowd of townsfolk, their faces blurred by age and damage, but one figure looked exactly like Lily, standing in the background, her expression blank. Chapter 7: The Descent. Determined to confront whatever lurked within the fog, Evelyn armed herself with nothing but a flashlight and Lily's journal. She ventured into the thickest part of Blackmoor, where the fog was like a wall, swallowing sound and light. Voices called out to her, familiar and foreign, promising safety, pleading for help. She saw figures moving just beyond her vision, their forms distorted, as if reality itself was bending. One shadow whispered her name with Lily's voice, but when she turned, there was only darkness. And then she saw Lily. Chapter 8: The Hollow. Lily stood in the center of an old clearing, her face pale and expressionless. Her eyes were wrong too dark, too deep, like bottomless pits. Evelyn called out to her, But Lily didn't respond. Instead, she smiled. A slow, unnatural stretch of lips that revealed nothing human. The fog around her shifted, revealing more figures. Dozens of them, their faces twisted, their eyes empty, mouths stretched into permanent, silent screams. They whispered in unison, a chorus of voices that didn't belong to the living, speaking words that made Evelyn's skin crawl. Evelyn tried to pull Lily away, but her sister's body was cold and unyielding, her skin like wax. It was then she realized Lily wasn't there anymore. Whatever she had been was gone, replaced by something else. Chapter 9. The Escape. Evelyn fled, the whispers chasing her through the fog. She barely made it back to the lighthouse, slamming the door shut behind her. Marcus was gone, his chair overturned, his lantern flickering on the floor. A trail of dark, wet footprints led to the door, disappearing into the mist. She knew she couldn't stay. Blackmoor was lost, consumed by the fog, and whatever lived within it. She packed her things and left at dawn, the road ahead barely visible through the mist. But as she drove away, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rear-view mirror. For just a moment, her eyes looked too dark, too deep, and a faint smile curled at the corners of her lips without her realizing. Epilogue. Evelyn never spoke of Blackmoor again, but the fog followed her, creeping into her dreams, whispering her name when she was alone. The shadows in her apartment grew longer at dusk, and sometimes they moved when they shouldn't. And sometimes, when she looks in the mirror, she wonders if she ever truly escaped. The end.